Retrospect encourages us to reflect on our stories, our histories, and our past experiences as we uncover the wisdom that shapes our future possibilities.
I want to take you back to the one day that quietly changed everything. February 2nd, 2004, Groundhog Day. I was in a hospital room, I was in labor, and I was knitting a pink blanket. I had spent weeks knitting that blanket. Every stitch was a promise for the daughter that I believed I would meet that day. For the weeks leading up to that moment, I didn't feel well. I kept telling my doctors, she's not moving. Could something be wrong? But over and over again, my doctor said, Kerri, you're fine. You're just anxious. You're a nervous, first-time mom. That morning, I was alone in the room. And then, suddenly, everything changed. My daughter's heartbeat disappeared, and a flat line stretched across the screen, longer than I could comprehend. Chaos, fear, the hospital residents rushed into the room. Their faces were pale, their voices were raised. They were so panicked, and they looked more frightened than I was. Then came the emergency C-section. She was so small, she could have fit into the palm of my hand, but I couldn't hold her. The umbilical cord was wrapped around her neck 3 times, choking her. She hadn't grown in at least the last 10 weeks. I never held her that day because she was rushed to the neonatal intensive care unit, where she began the real fight for her life. For days, doctors told me that they didn't think that she would survive. And even after I was discharged and had to leave her there, I came back every single morning, and the same nurse ran up to me to tell me that that would be the day that she died. That pink blanket, I never touched it again. Not because of the fear I felt, but it was the feeling of complete powerlessness. When Sophia finally began to pull through, doctors told me something else, that they didn't think that she would ever talk. She'd never speak. She made no sound because she had paralyzed vocal cords. And then one day, months later, in the middle of the night, she cried. A few years later, she lost her voice again. And again, the doctor said to me, we don't think it may ever come back. But it did. Sophia losing her voice as an infant and then as a child, and then getting it back again, reshaped how I thought about and understood that whole experience. That the beginning does not predict the ending. At that time in my life, I was building and growing a very successful pharmaceutical career. I was working across the US and Europe, building billion-dollar brands, leading teams, and everything looked like it was moving forward for me. But inside, something inside me had shifted. I couldn't unsee what I had learned. That my daughter only lived that day because I had access. I had access to emergency obstetric care, I had surgery, I had healthcare providers, I had a safety net. During that time, I started asking myself questions. What happens to women and babies who don't have emergency obstetric care? What happens when help doesn't arrive in time? And once you begin to recognize access, you also start to notice is absence. These questions stayed with me, and they lingered and haunted me. Years later, I was one of the few people at my organization to accept a 6-month assignment. I was on loan from that corporation, and I was sent to a global nonprofit organization that did disaster relief. I was sent to strengthen how it operated, and I was sent here to Santa Barbara. I was a month in that role when a devastating earthquake hit Haiti. Over 250,000 people were killed in an instant, and millions of people were displaced and made homeless in Port-au-Prince. I flew to Haiti, and I was part of a team that was doing response efforts there. And when I touched down, the first place I was taken was a morgue within a hospital. It was reserved for infants and babies and children. Many of them had passed away as a result of the earthquake, infections that lingered, infants that didn't have access to that thing called emergency obstetric care. Their bodies were covered, and they were laid out on long tables. And in that moment, I felt something eerily familiar. I felt that same feeling of powerlessness that I felt all those years earlier in that hospital room on Groundhog Day. And suddenly, the thread connecting my life became very clear. When everything is stripped away, what people need most isn't very complicated. It's food, it's water, it's shelter, it's access to medical care, it's the basics. But the basics aren't even just about survival. They're about restoring something much deeper. They're about restoring dignity, restoring stability, restoring hope. And they're the first steps that enable people to begin again. In those moments when I was working in Haiti, I realized something else. That everything I learned in my professional life, how to build awareness, how to mobilize resources, how to lead under pressure, it could be used for something different. Not to sell more things, not to make more profit, but to help respond when all is lost for the people who need it most. In 2010, I got off the corporate ladder, and I committed myself fully to disaster response work. I meet people on the very worst days of their life, and I help to restore a basic sense of shelter when all is lost. In my work at Shelterbox, I get to go to the world's worst disaster zones and war zones. I meet millions of people who've lost everything. And I see how just the basic simple things, something like a tent to put a roof over your head, or a solar light to a woman in a refugee camp who's leaving for work at night, or a stainless steel cooking set that enables a family to cook a hot meal and restore just a sense of routine and normalcy. How these basic things can mean recovery, they can mean safety, and they can mean a way forward. Over the years I've been doing this work, I see many things, but there are a few things that I continue to see that stay with me. In moments of profound loss, I see the very best of humanity. I see strangers helping strangers. I see neighbors sharing what little they have. And I see people choosing connection over collapse. We live in a very divided world. But crisis has a way of really connecting us and showing us how connected, how alike we actually are. That awareness keeps me grounded. And it always brings me back to that hospital room. I don't think I'd be doing this work today if I hadn't nearly lost my daughter that Groundhog Day. What once felt like fear and trauma later revealed something else to me. And it's that the moments that nearly break us can quietly reroute our lives and our purpose. Years after the doctor said my daughter wouldn't live, she wouldn't talk, she found her voice on a national stage and she kept going. At 15, she became the youngest contestant on American Idol, something no one in that hospital room would ever have imagined. In a few days, she'll turn 22, and in a few months, she'll graduate from Columbia University. When I look at her, I can't help but to think back about how it all began. And I think about that pink blanket. I brought it here today. And I hadn't touched it until a couple of days ago. I hadn't touched it since the day that everything went wrong. Since that day I felt so powerless. Since that day I couldn't protect the thing that mattered most to me. But a few days ago, I went into the garage and I sifted through some boxes, and after a few hours I found this. And I realized I didn't abandon it. I just wasn't ready for it. I started this blanket in a time that I felt no control and I felt no certainty. But I've decided I'm going to finish this blanket. Not because the story ended perfectly, but because it finally makes sense. Struggle doesn't disqualify us, and the past does not define us. But if we take time to reflect, it can help shape where we're meant to go. Thank you.